Picture a city of 500,000 people. Now imagine every single one of them is drinking poison. Not slowly, not occasionally, every single day. Now add that the poison is served warm, in clay mugs, by aproned men who will cheerfully refill your cup and wish you good health as they do it. Add that the alternative is worse. Much worse. The alternative will kill you faster. Add that the doctors know this and still recommend ale. That Parliament knows this and does nothing. That the mothers know this and give it to their children every morning with breakfast, the way you might pour orange juice today. That's London. That's every London. Medieval London, Tudor London, Georgian London. A city that ran for centuries on fermented grain and Thames River filth, and somehow kept producing some of the greatest thinkers, merchants, sailors, artists and criminals in human history. All of them drinking ale made from water that had at least 4 dead dogs in it somewhere upstream. Let me be more specific, because human waste doesn't really capture it. The Thames in 1740 received the contents of approximately 200,000 cesspits, the blood and entrails of every slaughterhouse in the city. The runoff from tanneries using dog feces as a key chemical ingredient, the bodies of drowned animals, the washing water of 500,000 people, the offal from fish markets, the dye from textile workshops, and whatever the tide had failed to carry out to sea from the previous day's contributions. And people drew water from this river, pumped it through wooden pipes into neighbourhoods, carried it in buckets to their homes, brewed ale from it, washed vegetables in it, mixed medicines with it. The Thames in 1740 was less a river and more a philosophical statement about what happens when 500,000 people share a bathroom with no plumbing. So, I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you're listening to this to fall asleep, or because you have some deep need to understand why everyone in 18th century London smelled the way they did. Both are valid. Both are frankly impressive. Get comfortable. Here we go. You wake up on your 3rd morning in London with your stomach trying to escape through your throat. Not slowly, not gently. There's nothing gentle about it. Your body has been working through the night on something you drank yesterday, and now it's presenting its findings, and the findings are bad. You make it to the slop bucket in the corner just in time. Afterward you sit on the floor of the room sweating despite the morning cold, your forehead pressed against the rough plaster wall. The room tilts slightly. Your vision has that underwater quality that means your body is deciding how seriously it wants to pursue this. From the bed you share with 2 other men, neither of whom have stirred, comes a voice. Water. That's Tom. He's 31, which in this city means he's seen things. His voice has the particular flatness of someone who's had this conversation before. You say, meaning yes, obviously that's the problem. The well on Pickle Herring Street. I was thirsty. A pause. The room tilts again. It was closer than the cook shop. Tom makes a sound, not quite a laugh, something more resigned. You drank from the Pickle Herring well. He doesn't say anything else for a moment. Outside, something is already moving on the street. Wheels on cobblestones. A voice calling something you can't make out. Is it going to get worse, you ask? That depends, Tom says, on how much you drank. A ladleful? Maybe 2. Then probably not. Probably just a bad morning. If you drunk a full cup, I'd be more worried. He rolls over, pulling his blanket up. Next time, drink your ale. That's the whole conversation. That's the entire London water education, delivered at 5 in the morning by a half-asleep man who doesn't even open his eyes. Next time, drink your ale. Welcome to London, 1743. Where the first lesson is also the most important one, and nobody gives you a pamphlet. You arrived 6 days ago from Ware, which is a market town in Hertfordshire, 30 miles north of London, sitting on the River Lee where the water runs clean and cold over gravel beds and tastes like nothing at all. Like water is supposed to taste, like the absence of everything except cold and wet. You knew London would be different. Everyone said London would be different. Different was the word. A very careful, very diplomatic word that does absolutely no preparation for the actual experience of arriving in a city of 500,000 people, all of whom have apparently agreed, collectively, to produce as much waste as physically possible and deposit it within 30 feet of wherever other people are trying to live. The smell hit you before the city did. 3 miles out on the Ware Road, coming down through Stoke Newington, you caught the first real breath of London, and your horse, not your horse, the coaching horse, flinched, just slightly, just a little twitch of its ears and a shortened stride, as if even the animal understood that what it was breathing was an act of aggression. By the time you reached Bishopsgate, you'd stopped noticing. That's the thing about London smell. It's not one thing, it's everything. Coal smoke from 10,000 fires lay in a permanent grey ceiling over the rooftops. The animal markets near Smithfield bleeding and bleating and contributing their particular notes. The river itself, which at low tide produces an olfactory experience that people who've smelled it never quite recover from. And underneath all of it, the foundational, constitutional, load-bearing smell of human beings packed too close together with insufficient facilities. You breathe it in. Eventually your nose accepts it as the new normal. Your nose has no choice. You're here because your uncle wrote a letter to a man named Silas Crump, and Silas Crump runs a brewery on the Bermondsey side of the river, south of the Thames, and he needs a strong back and a willing disposition, and ideally someone who hasn't already drunk themselves into uselessness on his product. You are 17 years old. Your back is strong enough. Your disposition is willing enough. And you have never been drunk on anything stronger than your mother's elderflower wine, which has the alcohol content of a polite intention. You are, in other words, exactly what Silas Crump asked for. Bermondsey in 1743 is not the fashionable address. It's the address you have when you're in the business of doing things that require proximity to the river, but produce smells that the northern neighbourhoods prefer not to engage with directly. Tanneries. That's Bermondsey's foundational industry. The art of turning animal skins into leather is older than writing, and roughly as pleasant to smell as you'd expect. A process involving large quantities of animal fat, urine, and dog feces to be. Yes, dog feces. That's not a mistake. Tanning requires something called baiting, a step in the process that softens the skin. And the active ingredient in the traditional baiting solution was canine excrement, specifically the enzymes in it, collected from the streets of London by people called pure finders, which is perhaps the most aggressively optimistic job title in human history, and sold to the tanneries by the bucketful. There are approximately 30 tanneries in Bermondsey. Their waste products go, directly without intermediate steps, into the local waterways, which feed into the Thames. This is where Crump's brewery draws its water. This is where you work now. The brewery is on Tanner Street, which tells you everything you need to know about the neighbourhood's primary industry, and nothing you want to know about the smell on a warm afternoon. It's a substantial building for this part of Southwark. 3 stories of London stock brick with a large arched gateway leading into the yard, a malt house attached to the left side, and a cooperage behind, where a man named Edmund spends all day hammering iron hoops onto wooden barrels in a rhythm that becomes, after the first week, as familiar as your own heartbeat. The gateway arch has the word crump carved into the keystone. Silas's grandfather built the brewery in 1689, the year after the Glorious Revolution, when someone apparently decided that the post-revolution moment called for more ale. They were not wrong. Silas himself is waiting in the yard when you arrive that first morning, having been directed from your lodgings on Horsley Down Lane by Tom, who works here too. Brewer's labourer, 7 years on the job, a kind of human geography of every drain and pump within a mile radius. Silas Crump is a man of medium height who's expanded considerably in the middle. His face is red in the way of a man who has spent decades in proximity to heat and steam, and his hands are the largest hands you've ever seen on a person, not employed specifically for intimidating other people. They are the hands of a man who has lifted things his entire life and intends to go on lifting them. He looks at you for a moment without speaking. You get the sense he's calculating something. Weight, maybe. Reliability. The agricultural soundness of your bones. From where? He says finally. Yes, sir. Water's good up there. Yes, sir. He makes a sound that might be nostalgic. Turns and walks into the brewery without further ceremony, leaving you to follow. Keep up, Tom says behind you. He doesn't explain things twice. The inside of the brewery is hot, not slightly warm, not the pleasant warmth of a fire on a cold morning, hot in the way that grabs you by the collar the moment you step through the door. The kind of heat that has weight to it, that presses on the top of your head and the back of your neck. The kind of heat that comes from industrial quantities of water being maintained at temperatures just below boiling for hours at a time. The smell is complex. Grain. That's the first layer. The sweetness of barley malt, almost biscuity, warm and somehow comforting. Under that, yeast, sharp and alive. The living smell of fermentation happening in dozens of great wooden vessels at once. And underneath both of those, carrying everything else, the particular mineral, silty, vaguely biological smell of Thames water. You'll learn to pass that smell. You'll learn what it means when the river smell gets stronger than usual. Spring floods bringing runoff, or the tide running low and concentrating everything that settles in the riverbed. You'll learn that certain batches of water smell worse and take more boiling. You'll learn eventually that the smell itself means nothing about quality in the way that matters, that what kills you in water has no smell at all. But that's later. Right now, on your first morning, you're just standing in the door of the mash tun room, sweating already, taking inventory of your situation. Silas points to a wooden yoke hanging on the wall, then to a door at the far end. Pumps through there, river inlet 50 yards down. You'll know it by the smell. He pauses. The worst smell. Relative. I carry water, you ask? Because it seems important to be clear. You carry everything, Silas says. For the first year you carry everything. Grain from the malt house, empty barrels from the cooperage, water from the pump. You get strong, or you get gone. He holds your gaze just long enough for you to understand he means both parts equally. Yes, sir. Breakfast is at 7, not before. Ale with it, not water. He says the last part without emphasis, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. Don't drink the pump water. He walks away. Tom appears at your elbow. He won't say that again, Tom says. About the water. So remember, why not water from the pump? Tom looks at you with an expression that belongs on the face of a much older man. Patient. Tired. The expression of someone who's explained the same thing to many new arrivals, from places where water is not actively trying to harm you. Come on, he says, I'll show you. The pump house is a low brick building built over one of the timber-lined channels that connects Crumps to the river. The pump itself is iron, worked by a long wooden handle, and it draws from the inlet pipe about 50 yards downstream. When you first approach the inlet at low tide, your body does something involuntary and protective. Your nostrils close, your jaw tightens, your eyes water. The Thames at low tide in Bermondsey in 1743. I need you to understand that this is not river smell in any sense that word might mean something pleasant. This is not the smell of clean water over rocks. This is not the salt and mud smell of an estuary in the country. This is the accumulated output of the largest city in Europe, deposited in a tidal waterway over the course of centuries. The mud exposed at low tide is black. Not brown, not grey, black and glistening, and the consistency of something that was once organic and has become something else through processes you prefer not to consider. The smell from it rises like something with physical substance, like heat shimmer but for your nose, a visible and oppressive emanation that carries components you can identify and components you cannot, and would rather not. You can smell the tanneries, the metallic wrongness of processing waste, the sweetly corrupted smell of animal fat breaking down in the sun, something that your body identifies on a very deep and prehistoric level as dangerous and dead. And underneath all of it, something you'll learn to call the Thames smell itself. The particular biology of a river receiving too much and filtering too little. The smell of centuries of London living its life into the water, and the water taking all of it. There, Tom says, pointing to where the inlet pipe disappears into the riverbed. That's what goes into the mash tun. You look at the water. The water looks back, or would if it had eyes, which it doesn't need because it has other ways of getting your attention. And we brew ale from this. We boil it first, Tom says. That's the point. Grain and hot water and hops. By the time it's ale, whatever was in the water is... He makes a gesture with his hand. Gone. Gone. Mostly. He says this in the tone of a man who has made peace with uncertainty. Gone enough. The ale won't kill you, the water will. He says it simply, not dramatically. Just a fact, laid flat on the table between you. The ale won't kill you, the water will. This is the central logic of London in 1743. This is the thing that, once you understand it, truly understand it, not just hear the words, but feel it in your body on a cold morning with your face over a slop bucket, reorganizes everything else. Every cup, every barrel, every delivery boy carrying ale through the streets, every inn, every cook shop, every tavern with its eternal crowd, not excess, not luxury, not even preference, survival. You start carrying water that first morning and you don't stop until sunset. The yoke is oak, worn smooth by years of previous hands, and it sits across your shoulders with a weight that starts as merely uncomfortable and becomes, by midday, something you begin to personify. A grudge. A specific and targeted animosity directed at the muscles connecting your neck to your shoulders. The buckets are iron-banded oak, roughly 4 gallons each when full. Full, they weigh approximately 30 pounds apiece. You carry 2 at a time. From the pump house to the mash tun is maybe 40 yards. Uphill slightly, across a yard paved with London-worn brick, uneven enough that there's an art to keeping the water in the buckets rather than on yourself. You make this trip many times. By the end of the first hour, there's a fine layer of Thames water on everything below your knees. Your boots are damp. The water has soaked through the leather in places, and your feet are wet and cold despite the heat. When you splash, tiny droplets hit your face, and you wipe them away with the back of your hand and try not to think too hard about what you're wiping away. The water from the inlet looks, this is the important word, looks cleaner than what you saw near the bank. The pipe draws from deeper, where the current runs faster, where there's at least the suggestion of dilution, but it still has colour. Not much, but enough. A faint brown tint that could be tannins from the upstream riverbed, or could be something else. Could be many things. Could be absolutely anything, really. "Stop looking at it," Tom says, passing you on his way to the copperage with a pair of barrel staves over his shoulder. "You'll only make it worse." The mashing process is where the water earns its transformation. Silas walks you through it once, on the second day, in the tone of a man reciting scripture he's recited so many times it's become automatic. The words come out in order, but he's watching the vessels, not you, his hands testing temperatures by touch, his eyes checking levels with a practice squint. Hot liquor. That's the brewer's term for the water at this stage. Hot liquor, already a name that distances it from its origins, goes into the mash tun with the ground malt. Temperature matters. Not boiling, because boiling destroys what you're trying to extract, but hot. The grain has to be coaxed essentially into releasing its sugars, and the temperature is how you do the coaxing. The sweet liquid that drains from the mash, the wort, goes into the copper kettle, and the copper kettle is where everything changes. The copper gets the fire underneath it. The fire is generous. The copper is massive. 200 gallons, the largest thing in the brewery, a curved dome of orange metal with a wooden-handled hatch at the top that you'll spend considerable time opening and closing over the coming months, face turned sideways against the steam that erupts outward like something that's been waiting for the door to open. Boiling. Full, rolling, sustained boiling. This is where the Thames water stops being Thames water, where whatever it was carrying, whatever was swimming in it, whatever was dissolved in it, whatever unidentifiable passengers were hitching a ride from the Bermondsey riverbank into Crump's Copper, gets dealt with. Silas doesn't explain it this way. Nobody in 1743 explains it this way. The germ theory of disease is still a century away. Nobody knows what's in the water that kills people. Nobody knows that what's killing people is a living organism too small to see. What they know is this: the water is bad, the ale is safe, the boiling is between the two. The logic is practical, empirical, entirely backward from how we'd explain it now, but functionally correct. They're killing organisms they can't see by applying heat they can feel, for reasons they don't understand, and the result is that you stay alive. There's something almost beautiful about that, a kind of accidental grace. Thousands of years of empirical observation collapsing into a practice that works before anyone can explain why. Or maybe it's just brewing beer. Maybe I'm being too philosophical at 6 a.m. with the yoke on my shoulders. The hops go in after the mash. Crump uses hops from Kent, which is a relatively recent development in the history of English brewing. The shift from unhopped ale to hopped beer happened gradually through the 1500s, and there's still, in 1743, an older generation that uses the word ale for the unhopped version and beer for the hopped, and thinks the Dutch brought hops from the continent specifically to ruin a perfectly good drink. They're wrong about the ruining. Hops do several things that matter. They add bitterness that balances the sweetness of the malt. They improve clarity. They act as a preservative, keeping the finished product stable longer. And they have mild antimicrobial properties, which nobody knows yet, but which contribute to making the finished drink safer than its starting ingredients would suggest. Every step of the process is, accidentally or deliberately, a step away from Thames water and towards something your body can tolerate. Silas pulls a small wooden cup from his apron pocket, dips it into the copper, and drinks from it with the unfussy satisfaction of a man checking his own work. He holds the cup out to you. The liquid is amber, clearer than anything that came off the pump. It steams gently. You drink. It tastes of grain and something green bitter from the hops, and something warm and present that you'll later understand is the living character of mid-fermentation. It tastes of nothing that came from the Thames. It tastes, and this is the word that arrives unbidden and entirely appropriate, like survival. The brewery runs on a logic of its own, a rhythm that by the end of the first week you've absorbed into your body the way you absorb the heat and the yeast smell, not consciously, but constitutionally as a new baseline. The grain delivery comes Monday and Thursday, heavy sacks of malted barley from the malt houses further into Suffolk. You and Tom and a man called Peter Leach unload these from the dray cart, which is pulled by a horse named William, an enormous dun creature of apparently infinite patience, who stands in the brewery yard while you work, and occasionally consults the middle distance in what looks like philosophical contemplation. The deliveries go out Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. The brewery's casks, hogsheads and kilderkins and firkins, which are barrels of various sizes with names that sound like something from a children's book, but are in fact the precise vocabulary of a business worth several £100 a year, go out loaded onto the dray, and Tom drives, and you ride beside him, and you make deliveries to roughly 20 establishments within a mile of the brewery. The route takes you through Suffolk's dense neighbourhoods, through streets narrow enough that the cart has to slow to a walk, and pedestrians flatten themselves against walls to let you pass. Through Borough Market, which on market days is a scrum of humanity and livestock, and produce carts that requires a level of cart navigation skill you're nowhere near possessing yet. Tom handles it with the calm of a man who has done this in conditions ranging from light drizzle to actual biblical downpour. The customers are a taxonomy of London drinking establishments, taverns, which are proper establishments with multiple rooms and a licence for wine as well as ale. Alehouses, which are essentially rooms in someone's house with a bench and a barrel, the most basic unit of London hospitality, licensed or otherwise. Cook shops, which primarily sell food but keep a barrel of small beer because everyone needs something to drink with their food, and the something cannot be water, so here we are. There's a distinction that matters here, and it's entirely about money. Small beer is what almost everyone in London drinks almost all the time. It's weak, maybe 1 or 2% alcohol, sometimes less. It's brewed from the same process as strong ale, but using the final runnings of the mash, the thinner, less sugary wort that comes out after the main brew is done. It's cheap. It lasts a few days before going off. Children drink it. Servants drink it. Labourers drink it with every meal. Hospitals give it to their patients. Schools give it to their students. Not because England is a nation of infant alcoholics. Because water will kill you and small beer won't, and even at 1% alcohol, The fermentation and boiling process has done the necessary work of making it safe. The stronger ales and porters are for the evening, for the taverns, for men sitting after work with something to discuss or forget or simply taste. And wine, real wine, French or Portuguese or Rhenish, is for the people who don't have to worry about the price of safety. The rich drink wine, the middling sort drink strong ale, the poor drink small beer, and the very poor, when they have no money for small beer, drink gin, which is a different problem entirely and one we'll get to. But right now, on the dray cart with Tom navigating through Borough Market, what strikes you is the sheer scale of it. Every cookshop has a barrel, every alehouse has several, every tavern has a cellar full of them, and every one of them needs refilling regularly, with ale brewed from water drawn from the Thames. The city runs on it. The pump house becomes, by the end of the first month, as familiar as the room where you sleep. You know its particular mechanics, the way the handle sticks on the upstroke in cold weather, the way the iron fittings sweat in summer heat, the sound the water makes coming up through the pipe, a deep wet gurgling that changes character depending on the tide. You learn the tides. In Bermondsey, in the shadow of London Bridge, the tides matter. The Thames is tidal this far inland, and the difference between high tide and low tide is the difference between drawing water that's at least somewhat diluted by tidal flow and drawing water that's been sitting in the riverbed, concentrating its contents in the heat of the day. High tide is better, not good, better. You learn this empirically, the way you learn everything in the brewery. Not from being told, but from noticing that the water at high tide is lighter in colour, that it smells differently, that Silas is slightly less watchful about how long you boil it. From noticing that a particular batch drawn on a hot day at low tide requires a longer boil and emerges from the copper with more of the herbal bitterness that covers the notes underneath. Nobody explains this. You just watch and learn. That's the education. Tom is your main teacher, in the way that experienced people teach new ones in this era. Not by instruction, but by demonstration and occasional correction. He shows you how to test the temperature of the mash water with your elbow, how to gauge fermentation by looking at the surface of the vessel and knowing, from pattern and colour and a particular kind of active froth, where the process is. How to taste finished ale and identify from it what went wrong, if anything. "This batch," he says one afternoon, handing you a cup, "what do you taste?" You taste it. Grain and bitterness and something underneath that you've been learning to identify. Something flat. Something that doesn't quite reach the finish. It's thin, you say, not as, you search for the word, not as round as last week's. Tom nods, one nod, the pedagogy of minimum encouragement. Malt got wet in storage. Partial germination before it was supposed to affects the sugar yield. He takes the cup back. Still safe to drink. Just not what it should be. Still safe to drink. The phrase recurs constantly in the brewery. It's almost a motto, a baseline. Things can be wrong, imperfect, substandard. But the fundamental test, the test that matters above all others, is, will this keep you alive? In a city where the alternative to imperfect ale is Thames water, still safe to drink is not a low standard. It's the most important standard there is. It's on a Tuesday delivery run, 6 weeks after your arrival, that you first properly see what else the Thames receives. Tom takes a different route than usual. A cart has overturned on the main road and the borough is blocked, and cuts down toward the river bank itself to come around. This takes you past the rear of one of the larger tanneries, the one that backs directly onto a small creek running to the river. You see the outlet pipe first. Iron, maybe 18 inches across, set into the brick wall above the creek. What comes out of it is thick and dark and steaming slightly despite the cool morning, and it moves like something between liquid and something with more body than liquid should have. The colour is impossible to name in positive terms. The smell arrives approximately 3 seconds before you see the pipe, and does not improve on acquaintance. The creek receives it. The creek is dark from bank to bank, not the natural dark of a deep channel, but a worked, industrial dark, a dark that comes from what's been deposited in it over decades. The surface moves with a lethargic slowness that suggests considerable thickness. "Don't breathe it in," Tom says, and clicks the horse forward. You pass another outlet, a slaughterhouse this time, the evidence self-evident, the water carrying something you make yourself not look at directly. Then a dye works, with a vivid chemical blue staining the bank downstream that would be almost beautiful if you didn't know what it was made of. All of it moving toward the Thames, all of it joining the general current, joining everything else. This is what gets pumped up at Crump's Inlet 50 yards downstream. You sit on the dray cart in silence for a while after that. The horse moves through a side street and back to the main road. The smell fades to the baseline London smell, which is bad but no longer actively threatening. Tom is looking at the road ahead with his standard expression of calm surveillance. "Does Mr. Crump know?" you ask finally. Tom glances at you. "Know what?" "What's—" You gesture vaguely in the direction of the creek. "Of course he knows." No edge to it. Simple statement. "Everyone knows. And the ale is still. You've been drinking it for 6 weeks." Tom raises an eyebrow. "Have you died?" "No," you admit. "There you go." He says it without irony. As a genuine conclusion to a genuine argument. You have not died from the ale. The ale is therefore adequate. The question is answered. Next question. You find yourself thinking about the ladleful of well water on your 3rd morning, about the bucket you made it to just in time, about Tom's voice from the bed. You drank from the pickle herring well. Ale won't kill you. Water will. The process, the grain, the copper, the boiling, the hops, takes whatever comes through that inlet pipe and turns it into something else, something survivable. You'd seen the logic explained in practical terms. Now you've seen both ends of it, and the explanation has a weight it didn't have before. The city is poisoning its own water supply and brewing ale to save itself from the consequences. It's the most sensible, insane thing you've ever encountered. Your lodgings are on Horsley Down Lane, which is a short walk from the brewery, and which describes itself optimistically as a lane despite being approximately wide enough for a cart only if the cart driver is philosophically committed to progress, regardless of what he's driving over. The house is 3 stories of timber and plaster with a ground floor occupied by a cobbler named Mr. Greer and his family. The upper floors are divided into rooms, each room occupied by as many people as the room can accommodate without triggering a philosophical debate about what occupying means. Your room is on the 2nd floor. 3 beds, which is to say 3 straw mattresses on wooden frames with ropes across the bottom. 6 people. The mathematics of this work out to approximately 1 person per mattress and 1 person per mattress partner, which is the standard arrangement for working people in Suffolk in 1743 and requires an adjustment period if you've come from a house where you had your own bed and ideally your own room. You adjust. You learn to sleep through Tom's breathing. which has a particular character around 2 in the morning that might generously be called rhythmic. You learn that the man on the next mattress, a porter at the Tooley Street wharves named Francis, has nightmares that involve considerable physical expression. You learn to stay on your own side. But the room has a fireplace, which in winter matters more than anything else. It has a window that faces east and catches the morning light. And it is, by the standards of working Suffolk, reasonably clean, which Mrs. Greer attributes to her own diligent management of the premises, and which everyone else attributes to the fact that the building doesn't have a cellar that floods. The water question in the house is typical of the neighbourhood. There's a pump in the yard. It draws from a well beneath the property, which is recharged by, and here you would rather not trace the logic too directly, groundwater. Groundwater that has been filtering through London soil. London soil that has been receiving the contents of approximately 50 years of a building with full occupancy and no connection to any kind of sewer system. The cesspits are behind the house, 2 of them. They're supposed to be emptied by the night soil men twice a year, which costs money, which means in practice they're emptied somewhat less often. The overflow situation is managed by a combination of hoping and gravity. The water in the pump is not, to say the least, the water from the River Lee. Mrs. Greer serves ale with every meal. She buys it in from an alehouse 3 doors down. Small beer in the morning, small beer at midday, small beer in the evening. The children, she has 4, ranging from around 3 to around 11, ages being approximate in this era, drink the same thing. You watch the 3-year-old, a girl called Bess, sitting at the kitchen table with a wooden cup of morning small beer, drinking with the unhurried satisfaction of a person who has never had anything else, and sees no reason to question the arrangement. This, too, is normal. Bess has never drunk water, will never voluntarily drink water, if she grows up learning what she's apparently already instinctively accepted. Will give small beer to her own children someday. Generations, centuries. The logic passing from parent to child without explanation, because explanation is less efficient than simply doing it. Don't drink the water, here's your ale. The daily walk to the brewery takes you through the morning street life of Bermondsey, which has a character of its own. Louder than the northern neighbourhoods, earthier, closer to the work that keeps the city functioning, and further from the pretense that the city runs on anything other than raw labour and animal products. The tannery workers are already at their frames when you pass, stretching hides in the early light. The tanners are easy to identify anywhere in the city by their hands, which are permanently stained a brownish grey from the bark liquors used in the process, and by their smell, which is specific to their trade and does not benefit from description. They are paid adequately for work that would otherwise go undone. The trade-off is understood. The butchers near the market are moving carcasses. The blood runs in channels cut into the street, actually cut for this purpose. Small gutters angle toward the nearest drain. On warm mornings the smell from these channels arrives early and lingers. You step over them without thinking about it within 2 weeks. Everyone does. There's a woman near the corner of Bermondsey Street who sells breakfast from a basket. Small hot pies, dense and greasy, and containing things identified only as meat filling, on grounds that specificity might harm sales. You buy one almost every morning. You try not to think too hard about the specifics. The pie is hot and the walk is long and your stomach requires attention. She has a clay jug on the side of her basket from which she serves small beer. 1 penny for a pie, a halfpenny for the small beer that goes with it. The pie requires the beer. The beer requires not being water. Morning, she says every morning, handing you the pie wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Cold one. Yes, you say, or getting, warmer, or whatever variant the weather requires. This is the complete social transaction. It repeats. It will repeat every working morning for as long as you're in Bermondsey. Eventually you'll know her name is Agnes, that she's the widow of a waterman who drowned in 1738, that she's been selling pies from this exact corner since the year of the previous king's death, and that she has opinions about the quality of the malt from the Tooley Street maltsters that she will share if you stand still long enough to hear them. You are, in other words, becoming part of the neighbourhood. The neighbourhood takes you in with the business-like acceptance of a city that has always been full of new arrivals from places where the water doesn't try to kill you, and has learned that the most efficient way to handle them is to absorb them into the working logic of the place until they stop noticing what they used to notice. You're almost at that point by the time the real trouble starts. It begins in the last week of August, when the heat that's been building through the summer becomes something else. Not hot weather, something heavier, something with intent. The city in deep summer is something you've been warned about but couldn't properly imagine until you're in it. The Thames runs lower, which concentrates everything in it. The smell from the water intensifies in proportion. The tannery creeks, deprived of the diluting effect of higher water levels, become more themselves, more specific, more assertive. The cesspits, heated from above and unable to drain with their usual grudging slowness, begin to assert their presence through the ground. The miasma, as people call it. The miasma theory, the idea that disease comes from bad air, from the putrid vapours rising from decomposing matter, is the dominant theory of disease in 1743. It's wrong, as we now know. Disease doesn't come from bad air. But in London in summer, the air near certain sources does smell terrible, and diseases do cluster near those same sources, and the correlation is good enough that the wrong theory produces some correct behaviours by accident. People who can afford to leave London in summer, leave. The wealthy have houses outside the city, or can travel. The poor stay and manage. Managing means ale. The neighbourhood knows, in its wordless collective way, that summer is the dangerous season. That summer brings the fevers. That summer is when you hear the death bells more often. That summer is when you don't drink the pump water even if you normally might have, even if you usually trust the well, even if it was fine last month. August. The air sits on the city like a hand over a mouth. And then the Harmon family, who live at the end of Horsley Down Lane in a building that backs directly onto one of the older cesspits in the neighbourhood, start getting sick. You hear about it first from Mrs. Greer, who hears it from the woman who hears everything and distributes information about the neighbourhood with the efficiency of a postal service. The Harmon mother, Mrs. Greer says at breakfast, in the tone she uses for news that is bad but not yet catastrophic. And the 2 older boys. Tom, who's eating his bread and small beer across the table, doesn't look up, but his jaw stops moving for a moment. Fever? He asks. Gripes first, then the fever. He resumes eating. Their pump, he says, not quite a question. Near the east cesspit. He nods once, finishes his bread, stands up. The conversation, for Tom, is complete. You follow him to work and think about the Harmon mother, who you've seen in the lane. A broad-shouldered woman with a basket always on her arm and a habit of greeting the street with a general morning that covers everyone within earshot without discriminating. The gripes first, then the fever. This is how it starts. 3 days later you know the shape of it. The Harmon family's pump draws from a well that's close. Too close, it turns out. The structural close that matters when cesspits start to overflow. To the cesspit behind the neighbouring building. The Harmons have been drawing from this pump all summer, because it's their pump and it's right there and it's August, and you don't make an extra trip to the street pump unless you have a reason. Now they have a reason. The oldest boy, who is perhaps 14, is the first one to come back to himself. Sitting outside on the step 3 days after the worst of it, pale as milk and thin in the face, blinking in the pale morning light. You bring him a cup of small beer from the breakfast table, because it's there, and he's clearly in need of something, and the instinct toward ale over water is now, 6 weeks into London, sufficiently ingrained that you don't even consider the alternative. He drinks it with both hands around the cup and doesn't say anything for a while. Better, you ask? I was, he says slowly. Very sick. Yes. My brother's still... He stops. You don't fill in the sentence. There's nothing useful to put there. The younger Harmon boy is still inside, still feverish, still in the particular danger that children occupy during these illnesses. Smaller, less reserved to spend on fighting. You hear through the walls and the lane the sound of it. The low-voiced urgency of the mother, recovered now at her child's bedside. A doctor comes. You see him on his way in. Black coat, professional case, the particular expression of a London physician which combines competence, fatigue, and a carefully maintained detachment from the number of houses like this one that he visits per week. He's in the house for approximately 20 minutes. When he comes out, he speaks briefly to the father. Later, Francis the porter tells you what the doctor said, having gotten it from the father, having gotten it from the daughter who overheard. The doctor advised, move away from the bad air near the cesspit if possible. Keep the windows open. Give water only if it's been boiled, and ale instead if you have it. Watch for the secondary fever. No explanation of mechanism. No identification of what's specifically wrong with the pump water. No recommendation to seal the well. But ale instead if you have it. Even the doctor, even from the position of formal medical authority. Ale instead if you have it. The Harmon boy recovers. It takes a week, during which the lane has a particular hush. The kind that settles over a street when a child is dangerously sick, and everyone is pretending not to monitor the situation, while also absolutely monitoring the situation. You see the changes from day to day, the small signals of whether it's going one way or the other. The door cracked open versus shut. The sound of the mother's voice versus silence. He recovers. Not every household is that lucky. Down toward the riverside, toward the wharves and the low buildings that crowd the bank, there are 2 deaths that August. You hear about them from Tom, who hears everything in the way of a man who has lived in a place long enough to be on the receiving end of all its news without having to ask for it. A woman on Pickle Herring Street. Pickle Herring Street again, that pump again, and a child in one of the alleys off Tooley Street. Both of them with the same story. The fever, the gripes, the rapid decline. Both of them near wells that draw from ground saturated by years of the neighbourhood's waste. Both of them, as far as anyone knows, people who drank water. There's a pattern, you say to Tom on a Thursday delivery run, wanting to work this out in words. The people who get sick are near the worst pumps, the ones that are close to the pits, Tom finishes. He's watching the road with his usual focused calm. Everyone knows. Then why don't they move? Buy ale instead of drawing water? He gives you a look. Small beer is a halfpenny for a quart. Water is free. If you've got a halfpenny to spare, you buy small beer. If you don't, he tilts his head toward the lane we just passed. The people who die from the water are the people who can't afford ale. There it is. The arithmetic underneath everything. It's not that people are ignorant. It's not that they don't notice the correlation between the pump and the sickness. They notice. They've been noticing for generations. But noticing doesn't help you if the ale costs money you don't have, and the pump is free, and the choice between certain thirst now and possible sickness later is a choice that poverty forces toward the probable cost of the future. This is not an 18th century problem. This is a human problem, compressed and clarified by the particular conditions of Bermondsey in 1743 into a form you can observe directly from a dray cart on a Thursday morning. You sit with it for a while. The horse, William, navigates a particularly bad section of road with the philosophical equanimity he brings to all obstacles. Does it bother you? You ask. Tom. Does what bother me? That the brewery, that we're part of the system that... Tom looks at you properly this time, not impatiently, considering. The brewery makes ale, he says slowly. The ale keeps people alive. If crumps didn't exist, the people who can afford small beer would buy from somewhere else, and the people who can't would still drink the pump water. We don't make the water bad. We just make something better. A pause. Do I wish the water wasn't bad? Yes. Can I make it not bad? No. Can I keep making ale? Yes. He turns back to the road. So I do. It's a utilitarian argument made by a man who has never heard the word utilitarian, made to someone carrying his first real encounter with the gap between a problem and his ability to fix it, and it lands with exactly the weight that such arguments land when you're young enough to still believe that knowing about a problem means you should be able to solve it. You can't fix it, but you can keep making ale. So you do. There's a character of London that you start to understand in September, as the heat breaks and the fever season slows to its autumn rhythm. The city is old. Very old. Old in the way that means it's built on itself in layers, that the Roman city is literally underneath the medieval one, which is literally underneath the Tudor one, which is being built over right now, which is why when they dig a new cesspit on Tooley Street, they sometimes find pottery. The water infrastructure has this quality too. The pipes that bring water to the northern neighbourhoods, the wooden pipes, staved oak bound with iron, running under the streets from the big water wheels at London Bridge and the New River Company's head at Islington, were put in by private water companies whose primary commitment is to profit and whose secondary commitment is to maintenance. The New River brings clean water. Actually clean water from Hertfordshire, from the same general watershed as Ware, from the same general category of water you grew up with, cold and clear, and without the particular character of a river receiving a city's worth of waste. But the New River delivers to households in the wealthier neighbourhoods, the ones that pay the quarterly water rate. It doesn't deliver to Bermondsey. It doesn't deliver to the alleys off Tooley Street or the rooms above cobbler shops on Horsley Down Lane. Down here you have the Thames, you have the wells, you have whatever the ground gives up after years of being London soil. You have the brewery. The great joke of London water, and it is a joke, in the sense that the universe sometimes constructs situations so structurally absurd that humour is the only available response, is that the people who most need clean water are the ones least likely to get it, and the people who most need protection from the Thames are the ones living closest to it. the tannery workers, the slaughterhouse workers, the watermen, the dray cart drivers, the porters and the pure finders and the night soil men. They live where they work because living further away costs money they don't have. They work where the industries are, which is on the river or near the things the river processes. They drink what's available, which is the water from nearby wells, which is the water the nearby ground offers, which is the water the nearby cesspits and tannery channels and slaughter waste is filtered down into. They drink small beer when they can. They drink ale when they can. They drink gin when they've exhausted those options or when they're trying to stop caring about the options. And some of them drink the pump water and get sick, and some of them die. This is the system. These are its features, not its bugs. This is London in 1743 working exactly as designed. The gin problem runs parallel to all of this like a second river. Darker, faster, less inclined to harbour life. You'd seen gin shops from your first week. They're not subtle about their presence. Signs promising warmth and oblivion at affordable rates. Doorways where the steps have worn smooth from the traffic. Occasional figures sitting against the walls outside in the postures of people for whom the afternoon has become conceptually difficult. Gin arrived in England seriously after 1688, when William of Orange came to the throne and, among other things, made it legal for essentially anyone to distill. Corn-based spirits, cheap to produce, potent, capable of being sold for a penny a tot in premises requiring minimal investment. It swept through the poorer neighbourhoods like, and here's the irony, like a disease. Like exactly the kind of disease that spreads through a population with compromised immune responses, poor nutrition, and inadequate sanitation. The gin drinkers are trying to solve the same problem you solve with small beer. The problem of water. The problem of needing to drink something that won't kill you in a city where the water will. They solve it with gin. The problem is that gin, at the concentrations being consumed in the poorer alleys of Southwark and Spitalfields and St Giles in the 1740s, is not a solution to the water problem. It is a different problem added to the water problem. It's alcohol as primary nutrition, alcohol as primary anaesthetic, alcohol as the thing you give a child because you have nothing else, and you know the water will hurt them, and the gin will at least not make them sicker immediately. There's a print shop on the Borough High Street that has a Hogarth print in the window. You saw it in your first week and stopped, because the detail in it is extraordinary. The amount of life packed into a small engraved image. Beer Street and Gin Lane, printed in 1751, though the conditions they depict are already present in 1743, the logic already running. Beer Street shows a prosperous, healthy London. Gin Lane shows a collapsing one. The Gin Lane image centres on a woman in various stages of destruction. There's an infant involved, there's a pawn shop, there's a coffin, and the streets around her are full of people in various states of dissolution. Buildings literally crumbling. The gaze is satire, moral instruction, social commentary. But standing here in Southwark, on the other side of the river from where Hogarth is probably working in his studio right now, you understand that what he's depicting is a real place and real people and a real choice that real people are making, not because they're weak or foolish, but because they're poor, and the choices available to poor people in London in this era: small beer if you can afford it, pump water if you can't, gin if you've decided that making the feeling stop matters more than making it to old age. The small beer is the middle path. the precarious moderate path, the path that requires a halfpenny you might not have. Crump's ale, every barrel that goes out on the dray, every establishment that serves it, every morning cup that Mrs. Greer puts on the table before her children. Middle path, safety made affordable, still safe to drink. October comes in grey and damp, and the neighbourhood shifts with it. The summer fevers retreat. The worst of the smell retreats with the cooling temperatures. The Thames settles into its autumn grey, higher with the rain, moving with more purpose. The brewery shifts too. More porter brewing, the dark, heavy London beer that's become dominant in the past decade or so. Roasty and sustaining, the working Londoner's winter drink, warm in the stomach and caloric enough to matter when the cold is seeping through your coat. Porter requires darker malts, roasted further in the kilns, giving that almost chocolate bitterness. And it requires still Thames water, always Thames water. The process in autumn has a different character than in summer. The mash tun retains heat better in a cold brewery. The fermentation runs slower, which the experienced brewers say improves the flavour. You're starting to taste the differences now, starting to understand what Silas is checking when he dips his cup into the copper. Silas begins, in October, to let you handle more. Not independently, not yet. But he stands back slightly, watches from across the room rather than over your shoulder, asks you the temperature of the mash water rather than telling you where to set it, asks what you taste in the morning samples. Good batch, he asks on a Thursday morning, handing you the tasting cup. You drink it. Roasty, slightly sweet at the finish. Good body. Yes, sir, bit more hop character than the last. You hesitate. Go on. More hop than last week's batch. Less of the... And here you reach for the word and find it. Less of the river in it. He looks at you steadily. You can taste the river. Sometimes. Low-tide batches, I think. Something underneath the grain. He's quiet for a moment. Yes, he says. You can learn to adjust for it. A pause that means he's deciding something. I'll show you how. That's the closest Silas Crump comes to a compliment. You're learning enough to notice when there's a problem and to name it. In the vocabulary of this brewery, this qualifies as progress. November and the first real cold. London cold is different from country cold. Country cold is clean. It comes from above, from the sky, and it's honest about what it is. London cold is a committee decision involving cold air, coal smoke, the damp coming off the river, and the particular chill of buildings that have never been warm because warmth requires wood or coal and coal cost money. Your room on Horsley Down Lane develops a personality in winter. The cold comes up through the floorboards. The fire has to be coaxed. The water in the washing basin freezes most mornings in November and almost all mornings in December, and you learn to break the thin ice with the heel of your palm and splash your face with the melt before it can refreeze, which it will try to do almost immediately. The small beer from breakfast is cold too. Cold small beer in the morning is one of those winter experiences that people who've had it carry in their sense memory forever. The bite of it, the grain taste amplified by cold, the way it sits in your stomach providing a ballast against the day that nothing else quite manages. You start to understand why people in cold countries drink as much as they do. Not for the intoxication. The small beer's too weak for that at breakfast quantities. For the warmth of the process, the caloric reality of fermented grain, the sense that something is going in the right direction even when the temperature disagrees. You're part of the supply chain for this. You're aching back from the pump house, your hands on the copper hatch, your early mornings in the brewery while it's still dark outside. All of this is what makes the cup of small beer on Mrs. Greer's table possible. Small things. They don't seem small from inside them. There's a version of this story that focuses on the grand drama, the hanging days, the great public moments, the monarchs and the merchants and the decisions that appear in history books. But the actual texture of living in 18th century London is smaller than that, more repetitive, more physical. It's the weight of the water buckets every morning, the knowledge in your hands of how the mash should feel, the smell of the brewery which has by November become something like the smell of home, the grain and yeast and hot copper, the particular living scent of fermentation happening around you constantly. It's the conversation with Tom on the delivery route, which has evolved into a comfortable silence punctuated by practical information. Look out here. The paving's bad. That's a new alehouse. Started buying from us last month. Don't give them credit until they've paid the first 3 invoices. This street floods when it rains hard. Go around. The city knowledge, the accumulating cartography of how to move through a place. Not just physically, knowing which streets go where, but practically knowing which surfaces are treacherous and which wells are dangerous and which markets are worth the detour. It's the mornings when the pump water comes up with a smell that makes you wince, and you add extra time to the boil without being told, because you've learned enough to know when to add extra time. It's Tom watching from across the yard and not saying anything, which means you got it right. These are the marks of becoming competent. They're not dramatic. They're just real. Winter deepens into December, and London does something that still manages to surprise you. It almost freezes. The Thames doesn't quite freeze solid in December 1743. That's more of an early January phenomenon in the particularly hard winters, but it slows visibly. The water at the pump house inlet has a different quality. Thicker somehow, slower to rise. You can see ice crystals forming at the edges of the channel that leads from the bank to the inlet pipe. This changes the brewing. Cold water takes longer to heat. The mash tun requires longer to reach temperature. The fire under the copper has to work harder and be tended more carefully. The fermentation vessels in the cold brewery need wrapping with old sacking to maintain the temperature the yeast requires. Silas is in the brewery earlier, stays later. He moves through the space with more attention than usual, checking temperatures, touching the sides of vessels with the back of his hand, reading the whole complex system through the language of warmth. You follow him on one of these evening checks, carrying a lantern. The brewery at night has its own character, the sounds amplified by the quiet, the fire's light making orange shapes on the copper, the smell of fermentation richer somehow in the cold, more complex, with the particular winter note that good December porter has, and nothing else does. She's working, Silas says, pressing his palm to the side of the largest fermentation vessel, listening. The yeast. Slow, but working. He's quiet for a moment. Cold slows everything. But if you keep it warm enough, not hot, warm, the yeast keeps doing what it does. Takes longer. Better beer. He removes his hand, looks at the vessel for a moment longer. Everything takes longer in winter, he says. Everything good anyway. He turns and walks toward the door, taking the lamp with him. You stand in the dark for a moment just listening. The sound of fermentation in a large vessel at night in winter. A low, very slow pulse. More breath than sound. The rhythm of a living process continuing despite the cold, despite the dark, despite whatever came in with the water. The yeast doesn't know what was in the water. The yeast doesn't care. The yeast is doing the thing it does in the warm vessel, in the winter dark, turning grain and water and hops into something else, something survivable. You're here on a specific morning in January 1744 when a moment happens that I want to tell you about, because it contains in small form everything the big story's about. You're at the pump house at first light, working the handle in the cold, your breath visible in the air, the iron handle so cold through your gloves that you can feel the metal's temperature through the leather. The water comes up thick and slow. You've got a good rhythm on it now. Pull down, let the mechanism reset, pull down again, and you're moving on something like autopilot, your mind still partly in the warm fog of sleep. A woman comes through the back gate. She's maybe 40, bundled against the cold, carrying a clay pot that she holds carefully in both hands. She comes to the inlet channel and kneels down on the cold brick, and she's going to draw water directly from the channel. You stop pumping. You can take from the pump, you say. Cleaner. She looks at you. Her face is thin, patient, the face of someone for whom this errand is one of many. An interruption of it is an irritation. I'll take it here, she says. I know what I'm about. She means, I know what this water is. I know exactly what's in it, and I'm drawing it anyway. You open your mouth, then close it. She draws her pot and stands up and wraps her arms around it against the cold and turns back toward the gate. It's for the washing, she says, not turning around, as if she heard the question you didn't ask. Washing, not drinking. She's using it for what it's good enough for and drawing a clear line in her head and her practice between what you wash and what you drink. She knows. She's always known. Right, you say. She's gone through the gate before you finish saying it. You stand there for a moment in the cold, with the pump handle in your hand and your breath making clouds in the January air, and the Thames water running slow in the channel at your feet. She knows. They all know. This is not ignorance. This is not a population so benighted they don't understand what the water is. This is a population that understands exactly what the water is and is making the best available decisions within the constraints of what they have. The ones who die aren't stupid. They're poor. They're making the calculation that says, today's thirst is more certain than tomorrow's fever. They're feeding children with what they can afford. They're washing with what they can't. The distinction matters to them. The woman at the channel is making it right now, carrying it in her pot back to her building, using it for the thing it's appropriate for, saving the small beer for the thing small beer is appropriate for. Running the logic of survival at 7 a.m. in January in Bermondsey. You go back to the pump. The water comes up slow. You boil it for longer than usual because the winter batches need longer. You watch the copper and add grain and hops and do the thing that the brewery has been doing for half a century before you arrived and will go on doing for another century after you leave. Still safe to drink. February and a delivery run that takes you further north than usual. Silas has a new customer, an alehouse in Cheapside, north of the river, in the heart of the city. Tom isn't well that day, so you go alone, which is the first time you've driven the cart by yourself on a route this complex. The crossing is London Bridge. You've been over it before as a passenger, never as a driver responsible for a full cart and a horse. The bridge in 1744 is not the bridge you'll see in pictures from 50 years later. The medieval structure still has buildings on it, houses and shops pushing out over the water on both sides, connected across the road by wooden galleries. turning the bridge into a covered street. The road between them is barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass, and at busy hours it doesn't manage even that. William navigates it with the patient expertise of a horse that has crossed this bridge many times and long since stopped finding it interesting. You navigate it with considerably more attention. The buildings on either side cut out the sky. The road is dark even in midday February light, lit in patches by the windows of the shops. The sound is enclosed. Voices, hooves, wheels, all bouncing off the buildings and magnified. The smell is enclosed too, though there's something different here. A river smell that comes up through the boards, sharp and cold in February, the winter Thames with its different character. At the midpoint of the bridge, there's a gap between buildings, a missing house, or a gap always left clear. You're not sure which. And through it you can see the river. You stop the cart for a moment in the gap. William waits. The Thames from London Bridge in February. Grey and swift, high with winter rain, the current running hard between the bridge's piers. You can see the mill wheels at the piers churning. You can see the watermen's boats working against the current. You can see in the middle distance the forest of masts at the lower wharves, ships waiting out the winter. And you can see the colour of the water. From up here, from this angle, with the winter light flat and cold, you can see it clearly in a way that you can't from the bank or from the pump house. The Thames is not brown here, not the particular riverbank brown that you've normalised. It's layered. There are colours in it that suggest depth and deposit. It's darker near the shore than in the centre. It moves in the way that things move when they have weight to them. You think about the inlet pipe at Crump's, about the copper boiling, about the amber liquid in the tasting cup, about every barrel on this cart on its way to an alehouse in Cheapside, about every cup that will be drawn from those barrels by people who will drink it without thinking about where it started and what it became between here and there. The process is everything. The invisible transformation is the thing that makes the city possible. Not the buildings, not the institutions, not the grand architecture visible from anywhere you stand, though all of those matter too. The boiling, the yeast, the hops, the thing that stands between the water and the person. William shifts his weight and flicks an ear in your direction. The signal of a horse with a job to do, and a driver who has stopped doing his. Right, you say. You click him forward. The bridge closes around you again. The gap in the buildings passes behind. On the north side, the city opens up, louder and more expensive, with different sounds and different smells and the same fundamental human requirements. You make the delivery without incident. The alehouse keeper, a heavy man in a leather apron who tastes the ale before he signs the receipt, nods once. Porter's better this year, he says. Tell your master. I will, you say. He nods. Transaction complete. You drive back across the bridge and think about telling Silas, about the particular satisfaction of work that gets better because you're learning to do it better. About December fermentation vessels in the cold, with sacking around them, about winter batches and longer boils, about water that becomes something else, about a city that should not, by rights, be alive. 500,000 people, open sewers, wooden pipes carrying river water straight to kitchen taps, summer fevers, wells near cesspits, and still, somehow, alive, not just surviving, printing pamphlets and building churches and starting businesses and arguing in coffee houses and writing music and painting portraits and making every kind of trouble and every kind of art. alive in large part because of what people like Silas Crump do every day in a heated building on Tanner Street, turning the water of the Thames into something the city can drink. By spring, you've been in London 9 months. 9 months is long enough to stop counting the months. To stop doing the arithmetic that places you at a fixed distance from home and measures your progress towards something undefined ahead. 9 months is when the city stops being the thing you're observing and starts being the place you're in. You know the route to Borough Market by instinct. You know the difference between the tannery smell on a dry Tuesday and a rainy Thursday. You know which watermen on the river landing have fair rates and which ones quote a price, and then recalculate once you're committed. You know how to test the temperature of the mash water with your elbow and what the right feeling means. You know what it means when Silas says she's working about a fermentation vessel, and you know the slightly different thing he means when he says it with a certain quality to his voice versus without. You know that Tom's morning silence is not unfriendly, that Peter Leach, the third labourer, is fiercely competent but dislikes being watched while he works, so you give him space. That Edmund the cooper has a son at sea in the Navy and checks the shipping news in the coffee house on his way in on Mondays. The brewery has a human geography. You know it now. And the ale, you know the ale. Not just its quality, but its meaning. Not just its taste, but its function. You know that every batch that comes out of that copper and goes into those barrels is doing something the city needs. One morning in March, Silas calls you into the office. This is unusual. The office is a small room behind the main brewery floor with a desk and a ledger and a window that looks onto the yard. You've been in it perhaps twice. He's standing behind the desk, not sitting, and he hands you a cup. Taste it, he says. You taste. Spring porter, slightly lighter than the winter batches, as the cold has eased and the fermentation runs faster. Good body, clean finish. Almost none of the river character you've been learning to taste through winter. It's good, you say. It's better than good, Silas says. It's right. He takes the cup back. I want you on the copper from next week. Main brewer's assistant. Tom stays on deliveries. You stay here. A pause. You've been learning fast. Faster than most. You taste what's there, not what you expect. He says it without warmth. Just flat, objective assessment. It's the most he's said about your performance since you arrived. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Pay attention. He sets the cup down on the desk. The copper is the most important thing in this brewery. The copper is where the water stops being the water. He holds your eyes for a moment. You understand what I mean? Yes, sir. Everything else, the malt, the yeast, the hops, it's all built on what happens in the copper. Get the copper wrong, everything else goes wrong. Get it right. He gestures at the cup. Right, you say. He nods. Once. Monday, he says. Don't be late. You leave the office and walk back through the brewery floor, past the mash tun and the fermentation vessels and the pump house door, and you stand for a moment in the yard in the March morning with the smell of grain and yeast and the faint cold water character of the Thames under all of it. The copper is where the water stops being the water. This is a job description. This is also, you think, a philosophy of some kind. Not the grand kind, not the kind that belongs in pamphlets or parliament speeches. The small kind, the kind that makes cities possible from the inside out, from Tanner Street, in the ordinary daily work of transformation. Spring in London means the river rising and then settling. It means the tanneries returning to their full summer industry as the cold recedes. It means the smell returning in stages. First the river, then the tanneries, then the full concert of London, summer building day by day through April and into May until it reaches its seasonal peak. You're on the copper now. The copper requires attention that the water carrying didn't. Attention that's specific and continuous and cannot be divided. You can carry water on autopilot. You cannot run a 200-gallon copper kettle on autopilot. Temperature gradients within the vessel. The rate of the boil, not too vigorous, because that drives off things you want to keep. Not too gentle, because you need the process to actually happen. When to add the hops, and in what quantity, which changes with the character of the grain, and the season, and the particular lot from Kent, which varies. Silas watches more in this first month on the copper than he's watched anything you've done. Not hover, he doesn't hover, but he's present in the room more, and he tastes the tasting cups himself, as well as having you taste them. There's a batch in April that goes slightly wrong, not dangerously. The ale is still safe, always that. The copper and the process ensuring that minimum. But it's flatter than it should be. Less of the roasty depth of good spring porter. You know what happened. You know before Silas says anything. The grain was from the new lot, which runs slightly different from the winter stock, and you adjusted the temperature but not enough, and the mash didn't extract as completely as it should have. The grain, you say when Silas tastes it. Yes. I should have gone higher. The new lot needs 3 degrees, he says, warmer, for the new Kent grain. A pause. You'll remember. Yes, sir. He sets down the cup. Still safe, he says. Still safe. The baseline. The thing that cannot be compromised. Everything else can be imperfect. The depth, the finish, the colour, the character. Everything else can be improved. But safe comes first. You think about the Harmon boy on the front step in August, with the cup in both hands. The colour coming back to his face over the course of the morning. 3 degrees warmer for the new Kent grain. The things that matter, summer comes. Your first proper London summer as a person who knows what they're doing. The brewery in summer is hotter than you could have imagined in October. The copper running continuously. The mash tuns steaming. The fermentation vessels adding their particular warmth. The walls of the building holding the heat against all the efforts of the day. You work in the heat the way Tom taught you. Slowly, deliberately, without wasting motion. Drink small beer throughout the day, not for anything except hydration, 2 or 3 cups across the hours, the yeast-live liquid going in and doing what it does. Keep your head covered when you're near the copper. Don't move too fast, don't stop too long. The heat has a physical presence. It presses on the top of your head and in the space behind your eyes. By mid-afternoon on the hottest days, it becomes something you navigate rather than something you ignore. But it's also, and this is the summer knowledge, it's also the thing that makes the ale. The heat is the point. The heat is where the transformation happens. The city outside is dealing with its own heat in the ways it has, the wealthy retreating to their country houses, the rest managing. The river at its summer worst, the smell at its summer depth, and in the cellars of 100 alehouses, in the barrels delivered by Tom and the other drivers, in the cups on the tables of cook shops and inns and the breakfast tables of houses, all across Southwark and the city and Bermondsey. The ale, safe, because of the copper, because of the boil, because of the process that no one has explained correctly, but everyone has gotten right. There's an evening in July when you walk to the river after work, not to the inlet pipe. Past it, down the bank to where the river opens up, where the wharves thin out and there's a section of bank that isn't entirely built over, where the low tide has left a strip of mud and gravel between the wall and the water. You sit on the wall with your feet over the edge and watch the Thames. The evening light is doing something to the water. The colour it turns at sunset. London river colour. Thames brown becoming something else in the low light. Copper and bronze and a suggestion of amber where the current catches the reflection. The smell is present. Always the smell. But less aggressive in the evening than in the afternoon. The tide is coming in, and the incoming tide brings with it something marginally cleaner from downstream, marginally less concentrated. A waterman's boat crosses below you, moving fast with the tidal flow. The waterman is facing backward, the way they row, watching where he's come from rather than where he's going, the way river work requires. A group of children are doing something at the edge of the mud, 50 yards to your right, playing some game that requires the mud, because it's there and you don't need equipment for it, and childhood in Bermondsey in 1743 doesn't require a rationale for entertainment. The city at evening coming down from the heat of the day. You've been here almost a year. You have carried what the estimate works out to be several thousand buckets of Thames water. You have stood at the copper approximately every working day since March, and done the thing that turns it into something else. You have delivered ale to 20 establishments across Suffolk and Cheapside. You have served the function of the process in the long chain of processes that keeps the city alive. Nobody has thanked you for this. Nobody is keeping score. But the children playing in the mud down the bank, their mothers will give them small beer with their supper tonight. The alehouse keeper in Cheapside who tasted the spring porter and nodded. The Harmon boy, who is now enough recovered that he helps his father at the wharves. The ale won't kill you. You look at the river and the river looks back, or does its version of looking back, which is to continue being exactly what it is without apology or explanation. Poisonous. Alive. Brown in the evening light. The city's central problem and the city's central supply. The thing that kills you if you drink it, and the thing you have to transform into something else daily, in large quantities, or the city dies. You've been part of that transformation for a year. There's always a philosopher, who will eventually write that a city is its infrastructure. That what actually makes a civilization is not the art or the architecture or the governance, but the pipes and the wells and the systems that move water and waste and keep the living separate from the dying. In 1743, nobody's written that yet. The idea exists in practice, but not in theory. But you know it in your body. Every morning the yoke on your shoulders, every afternoon the copper heat, every batch that comes out right, or right enough, and goes into the barrels and goes into the city and comes back as people continuing to be alive. This is civilization. This gritty, unglamorous, sweating, smelly, practical work of transformation. The churches are beautiful. The Royal Exchange is magnificent. St. Paul's Dome above the city is an achievement of human ambition that makes you catch your breath every time you see it from a height. But underneath all of it, the water, and underneath the water, the thing you do with the water, and underneath that, the ordinary human fact that someone has to do it, that it doesn't do itself, that civilization is the accumulation of every person who does the thing that needs doing every day, without ceremony or acknowledgement, because the alternative is that people die. You do the thing that needs doing. That's enough. September, and a year complete. Silas marks it in the way Silas marks things. A cup of the current batch, handed across the copper, no ceremony. A year, he says. Yes, sir. He looks at you with the expression that means he's calculating something. Weight, reliability, the soundness of your bones in the metaphorical sense. Good enough to stay, he says. From Silas Crump, this is an encomium. You stay. You're going to hear a lot in the coming years about the filth of London, about the state of the Thames, about the appalling conditions of urban living in the 18th century. Some of this will come from the newspapers, which in 1743 are relatively new but enthusiastic, and which have already discovered that writing about the disgusting state of the city generates readership in proportion to the disgustingness described. Some will come from the pamphleteers. There are always pamphleteers. People with opinions and access to a printing press are the Twitter of the 18th century, and they have many opinions about many things, including the water. Parliament debates the water companies periodically. The water companies attend these debates and explain why improving their infrastructure would require price increases that would benefit nobody. Parliament nods and moves on to other business. The water companies continue pumping Thames water through wooden pipes into London's neighbourhoods. And in the summer, people get sick, and in the worst summers, some of them die. This is the system. This is its equilibrium. What changes it, what eventually changes it, is not a sudden decision to care. It's not Parliament waking up one morning with a conscience about the pump on Pickle Herring Street. What changes it is scale. A cholera outbreak so large in 1832 that it cannot be ignored, and another in 1848, and another in 1854, when a doctor named John Snow will map the pattern of cases in Soho and trace them to a single pump on Broad Street, and actually prove, with data, with a case you can follow from premises to conclusion, that the water is doing what everyone has always known the water is doing. Remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, end the outbreak. It will take another 50 years after Snow for the sewer system. Basil gets brilliant, buried, still functioning network of enclosed pipes beneath London to actually separate the sewage from the water supply. The great stink. The Thames so poisonous in summer that Parliament itself, which sits on the river bank, cannot conduct business and has to adjourn because the smell coming through the windows makes work impossible. The problem gets solved when the people who have the power to solve it start suffering from it themselves. In 1743 they haven't started suffering yet. The smell bothers them but doesn't sicken them. The disease clusters in Bermondsey and Southwark, and the alleys off Tooley Street, not in the fine houses of the northern neighbourhood served by the New River. So the system continues, and at Crump's Brewery on Tanner Street the fire burns under the copper, and the yeast works in the dark, and the ale flows out into the city's veins, keeping it alive while the water tries to kill it. On quiet evenings, when the shop is closed and the work is done, you sometimes sit by the window in the back room of the brewery, looking out at the yard. Edmund the cooper will have gone home hours ago. The fermentation vessels work their slow work in the silence. The fire under the copper is banked low, maintaining temperature through the night. In the morning you'll restart it. You know how. You could do it with your eyes closed now. Mrs. Greer serves supper on Horsley Down Lane, and little Bess drinks a small beer with both hands around the cup, not thinking about it at all, because why would you think about it? That's just what you drink. You think about the question nobody asks, not because they don't want to know the answer, because they've been living the answer for so long it stopped being a question. Why doesn't anyone just drink water? Because the water will kill you. But you're a city of 500,000 people. Surely someone could what? Change the Thames, move the cesspits, separate the sewage from the groundwater using engineering that won't exist for another century? You can't think your way out of the physics. You can only work with what you have. What you have is grain, and water that needs to be transformed, and fire to do the transforming, and yeast that does not care where it came from, only where it's going. The rest is patience. The rest is showing up every morning and doing the thing again. You'll forget things about this year. The specifics blur over time. The exact sequence of a particular batch, the precise smell of the pump house on a given Tuesday, the names of some of the alehouse keepers on the delivery route. But some things stay. The weight of the yoke on the first morning and the way it felt 6 months later. The same weight, your body simply grown into it. The sound of Edmund's hammer, keepin' time. Tom's voice from the dark of the room, next time, drink your ale. The Harmon boy with a cup in both hands, colour returning. The woman at the inlet channel carrying her clay pot for the washing, knowing exactly what she was doing and why. Silas in the door of the pump house, turning back just far enough to say a single thing. The copper is where the water stops being the water. That's the whole lesson. Everything else is application. You're drifting now. The sounds from outside, wherever outside is, wherever you are tonight, have gone from things you're hearing to things that are simply part of the air. The difference between awake and asleep is becoming less precise. Your thoughts are slowing toward the rhythm of the fermentation vessel in the winter dark. Slow, steady, working. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way the Thames takes everything eventually. Not violently, not with drama, just with the patient insistence of moving water that has all the time it needs. Let the noise of the day go downstream. Let your hands rest. Your actual hands, in your actual bed, in the actual present. Let them rest the way working hands rest when the work is done. Flat, heavy, warm. Let the copper cool. The fire is banked. The vessels are doing their slow work without you. Tomorrow you'll restart it. You know how. You've always known how. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's just this. The warmth of wherever you are. The sound of your own breathing settling into something slower. The way the mind loses its edges when you stop asking it to maintain them. You're warm enough, safe enough, far enough from the Thames to sleep without the smell. That's more than most of the city ever had. That's enough. Centuries will pass. The London you've been living in tonight will change beyond recognition. The tanneries on Tanner Street will close. The brewery will be rebuilt, demolished, replaced with something else. Horsley Down Lane will be absorbed into a wider street that will itself be absorbed into the infrastructure of a city that grows larger every decade until it's simply everywhere. The Thames will be cleaned, not quickly, not without a fight. But eventually, the thing that people in Bermondsey in 1743 knew to be true and had no way to fix will be fixed. The sewers will go in. The treatment will happen. The water will come out of taps clear and cold, and without the particular character of a river that has been doing too much work for too many people for too long. Children born after 1900 will grow up drinking water without thinking about it. Just water from a tap, safe. They won't know what it cost. They won't know about the summers in Bermondsey. or the pump on Pickle Herring Street, or the Harmon family, or the particular arithmetic of a halfpenny for a quart of small beer versus the free pump that might kill you. They won't know, and that's fine. That's what progress looks like from the inside. The thing that used to require constant vigilance becomes the thing that's simply true, simply present, simply water coming out of the wall when you want it. But people will still live here, still work here, still make things from imperfect materials using accumulated knowledge, still pass that knowledge from person to person, still show up in the morning and do the work again. The human part doesn't change. The need for rest at the end of a long day, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way the river takes everything. Slow and certain and without asking. Let the sounds of your world settle into quiet. Let your breathing slow into the rhythm of something asleep, something at rest, something that has done its work for today and earned the dark. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You've made it through another day in whatever city you're in, with whatever water runs through its pipes. Clean water, blessedly clean water, the hard-won ordinary miracle of a century of engineering and argument and eventual will. You didn't have to boil it. You didn't have to brew it. You just turned a tap. That's the gift. That's what all of it was for. Take it. Rest. And if you dream at all tonight, dream of a January morning on Tanner Street. The smell of grain and heat and yeast. A clay cup of amber liquid steaming in the cold air. The taste of something that started as the worst water in the world and became, through patience and fire and the accumulated knowledge of generations, something you could live on. Something survivable. Good night.